everyone, I am Uriah Heep, and this is my Literary Cafe. Welcome to this edition of the Great American Novel Series, brought to you by the Author's Matrix. We are listening to Dan Blanchfield's The Village Idiot. And after Chapter 16, where the Science Symposium didn't go well, Nigel's face to face with his parents now, in the aftermath. Oh, what will happen now? We're about to find out. So, without further ado, on to Chapter 17 of The Village Idiot. Enjoy.
Chapter 17. When the Crumbly couple arrived home later that afternoon after their successful meeting with the eminent Professor Umph, they found their son sound asleep in his room. They wished not to disturb him, so they quietly finished their business, putting the house in order, and Edith prepared the evening meal. Nigel did not awake until the following morning, and was greeted by both parents as he entered the kitchen. Jonah was seated at the kitchen table, cackling at the morning cartoons featured on the back page, while Edith hummed her favourite tune as she prepared the morning meal. This feeling of delight was not what Nigel expected, given the drama of the past hours, but he was relieved nevertheless. Perhaps my parents have not heard about the Science Symposium, Nigel reasoned to himself as he sat at the table with his father. I went ahead and prepared your favourite meal, Nigel, Edith said, as he placed a bowl of steaming hot porridge with large chunks of fecal matter before him. It was as if his mum felt that nothing had changed in his life. He had surreptitiously avoided eating any of her cooking containing contaminated raw sewage water for months, yet Edith was serving up that toxic slop and setting it down before him like everything he had learned and taught his parents over the previous months did not exist. Nigel felt insulted and wondered aloud the meaning of his mum serving him such a meal at this time. Mum, Nigel said gently, why would you serve me porridge prepared with raw sewage again? You know full well that I have not eaten such a meal in months and months. Now, Nigel, his mum said as she placed a bowl before her husband and took one for herself, we must put all this water nonsense behind us. She hesitated, looked up at her husband for strength and approbation and boldly continued, your father and I met Professor Umph yesterday in his office. And what a magnificent office it was. I was telling your father. Nigel froze in his seat. His mum continued, but Nigel heard nary a word. What did you say, Mum? Nigel asked. Well, Nigel, Edith continued, I was saying what a wonderful office your professor has at the university. I was just so impressed. He must be such a learned man. Nigel felt the evasion of his question was unnecessary. You and father met with Professor Umph? Nigel blurted out. For whatever reason, pray tell. Jonah and Edith sensed the growing anger in their son at the revelation that they had met with his professor. While they did not speak in unison, the momentary glance between them spoke to the strategy they would thus employ to defuse the situation. Your Professor Umph is a wonderful man, Nigel, Edith continued without the assistance of her husband, who remained strategically quiet as she spoke. He graciously gave your father and me an audience yesterday afternoon to discuss the Science Symposium. He was most gracious, she repeated. The professor shared our concerns about your future and assured us that it remains bright. Nigel did not know what to make of his mum's last statement. What did she mean by characterizing it as remaining bright, Nigel thought. Still, he said nothing, and his mum continued. I even baked my special recipe of fecal-laden brownies baked in fresh raw sewage for your professor, and he loved them, Edith continued. He even graciously acceded to my offer to bake him even more in the future. Edith hesitated, then continued. Professor thoroughly enjoyed the generous helping of my brownies. He was so very kind and thoughtful, Nigel. You are so fortunate to have a professor like Professor Umph on your side. So far, Edith had said nothing of substance regarding their meeting with Nigel's professor. He was beginning to wonder if they discussed anything of substance at all. He need not have waited any longer, as Edith started to relate their discussion with the professor regarding the symposium. "Of course," said Nigel. "Professor Umph was quite disturbed over your disastrous presentation that afternoon. He was quite reasonably disappointed in you, I am ashamed to admit. However, he assured us that the university believes in redemption, and that is such good news, Nigel." It was apparent now that his parents had had a similar conversation with Professor Umph that he had had with him. It was the word redemption that struck Nigel forcefully. "Yes, Nigel," Edith continued unabated. "Professor Umph believes in your redemption. He was enthusiastically ebullient about the whole sordid affair. We were much taken aback by his goodwill." Nigel slumped back in his chair, pushed back by his mum's words mingled with the steaming stench of porridge laid before him on the table. "So, Nigel," his mum concluded, "all you must do is publicly renounce this ridiculous obsession with water and admit that you are under the spell of the cult leader, the village idiot, and you will be welcomed back into the university community with open arms. Isn't that just wonderful, dear?" his mum said with equal enthusiasm as the professor had exuded, and with an accompanying tear in her eye. Nigel did not expect such a conversation with his parents that fateful morning. While they had no right, in Nigel's mind, to interfere with his university career as they did, though, perhaps it was better that all was now out in the open. "So, Nigel," Jonah finally said, "have you written your redemption yet?" Jonah Crumbly was a simple man who thought little about life's largest questions. His life was gruesome, and all his energy was drained, as his work in the sewage plant day by day left little time for thoughtful contemplation. He was unsure what the word redemption meant, although he had heard it spoken of in ethereal terms at Sunday services. "Your father is right, Nigel," Edith chimed in gently. "Your professor expects it to be completed during this week of suspension from the university." Nigel could not listen to another word from his parents, who spoke to him like he was a young child once again, rather than a university student. He pushed aside the toxic breakfast before him and left the kitchen to prepare for a trek into the Highlands to see Addison Way. He wished not to offer any answers to his parents' entreaties, nor was he interested in any further communication that would give them notice as to his plans for the day. He merely gathered up his travelling gear and left for the Highlands. He arrived at Addison Way's residence by mid-morning, only to find his raps on the front door go unnoticed. He returned to the lab behind his residence, where Addison busily managed multiple experiments. His friend and mentor greeted him with great joy, so much so that Nigel believed that knowledge of the Science Symposium had not reached Addison's ears, and he remained in the dark. After exchanging greetings, and Addison offered Nigel fresh water and a breakfast prepared with crystal clear, freshly purified water. The two sat down to catch up on the news, as they had not seen each other for too long. "What have you been up to, Nigel?" Addison asked. Nigel did not know how to answer that question, as it was so open-ended that he could have honestly said anything he wished, yet he wanted to speak about the symposium most of all. He hesitated and found it helpful to stuff additional breakfast in his mouth to delay any response to Addison's question. Addison, on his part, sensed the disinclination by his friend to answer his question directly, so he spoke up first. "I know all about the Science Symposium, Nigel. I may live in the Highlands, but news also reaches here." Addison chuckled and took a sip of water. His light-hearted manner put Nigel at ease for the first time since he stepped across the threshold of the lab, and for that, Nigel was grateful. "You heard all about it?" Nigel inquired. "Yes." "You made quite a sensation, Nigel." "And you are not angry, Addison?" Nigel asked meekly. "Angry?" Addison asked. "Why would I be angry, Nigel?" "Well," Nigel continued as meekly as before, "I failed. Everyone attacked me. I ruined the symposium. Why wouldn't you be angry with me, Addison?" Addison put his glass of water on the table before Nigel. This glass of fresh, pure water represents the best thing in man. It is true, pure, unadulterated water. Nothing more and nothing less. There are no contaminants in it. There is nothing that will harm one. If one were to drink it, there would only be good effects arising from its consumption. If humanity accepted and embraced this scientific fact, life would be so different from what it is today and what it has been for thousands of years. The diseases that inflict mankind today would simply no longer exist. What the everyday person believes is standard in their lives and quite natural would no longer be present. A man walks the earth today sick, diseased, and corrupted by the raw sewage water he drinks, cooks with, and bathes in. He sees no scientific correlation between that foul, toxic sewage water and his health, but it is there for anyone who wishes to see it. Why is man so against understanding what you seem so at ease with, Addison? Nigel asked. If I had been a famous scientist at the time of my discovery, Addison rejoined, if the press worldwide were to have praised me significantly and justly for my research and discoveries, humanity would have embraced my work. Had the academic world also praised my findings, it would have been easier for everyone to welcome the good news I had to tell. But, alas, my dear friend, Nigel, that did not happen. I was a nobody in the eyes of the academic world, in the world of the newspapers of the day, and even in the world of the great religions. Why would you have had to have been famous for people to recognize the importance of your discoveries, Addison? Nigel asked innocently. He listened to Addison's words but could not comprehend them and grew frustrated. There is a truism about all people, Nigel, Addison further explained, that has individuals in prestigious positions of power to resent knowledge that does not arise from themselves. It is a horrible and deadly conceit, and it is present in all of us, not just those people in high offices. But if something is true, Nigel asked, then it is true. Why wouldn't people happily accept it? I have told my parents about your study of water, but they remain steadfastly using raw sewage water gathered from the open sewage trench that runs past our house. Nigel, Addison replied, what if your parents opened their newspaper tomorrow morning and there, splashed across the front page, was an article about the deleterious effects on the human self from this ancient practice of consuming raw sewage water? What if in the article, all the great minds of the day, scientists from around the world, from the most prestigious universities, were quoted as saying that it is pure, fresh, crystal clear water that is the very basis for life itself, and it is that water that mankind must use for all its needs? Nigel had never thought of it this way. How do you think your parents might react if that is what they read in the morning paper rather than the article about the university's Science Symposium? Nigel laughed. They would be shocked. They would be grateful, Nigel, Addison said with the utmost seriousness. That is true, Nigel replied with a bit of embarrassment writ large across his blushing face. You see, Nigel, Addison continued, people do not want to learn something large that does not have sufficient prestige to make them important. Nigel was stunned at the statement. Whatever does that mean, Addison? He inquired. When new knowledge comes into the world, Addison rejoined, that is large and true, yet the source of that knowledge does not arise from something that does not have sufficient prestige in the minds of the so-called experts of the day. People will shun it, no matter that they see it as true. If there is a world-renowned composer whose work in the field of music is recognized as among the most important works ever in that field, and I praise that person, people will welcome and respect that praise and value it truly. They would praise me for being so intelligent and right to praise that famous composer. But what if I show that unbounded respect for someone not generally known, yet the praise is beautifully justified? Addison did not wait for Nigel to answer his rhetorical question. Were I to justifiably honor and praise that unknown person, people would look at me askance. I would get more importance for praising the famous person, but people would think me strange and perhaps deluded for praising someone not generally recognized as important. And you, Addison, Nigel asked meekly, are not known in the world. No, Nigel, Addison replied. I am not famous, nor have I been recognized by the authorities of the day, so people get furious and wish not to learn from me, no matter how much it stunts and cripples their lives. Addison, Nigel spoke up after a long pause in the conversation. There is more. Professor Umph has asked me to confess my ignorance and renounce all my studies of water with you to resume my academic career. I am expected to name you as a deranged cult leader who duped me. The university expects me to earn my redemption by denouncing you and your life's work to be welcomed back into the university community again. I have a week to prepare my document. The university will have me sit down with the publisher of the Crumbly Village Times, and the paper will publish my confession. Addison said nothing. What am I to do, Addison? Nigel implored with tears in his eyes.
So, Nigel has the biggest conflict a person can have. Does he stand up for what's true and maybe ruin his career in the process? Or take it back and push himself forward and continue his career? What a decision! Well, maybe we'll find out in Chapter 18 what decision he made. We'll see. But for now, I am Uriah Heep. This is my Literary Cafe. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Great American Novel Series brought to you by The Village Idiot. No, it's not by The Village Idiot. I'm The Village Idiot. No, it's brought to you by Author's Matrix. Anyway, goodbye, good luck, and we'll see you next time. Good evening.